Hi everyone, thank you for joining me again today. We are on day 3 of our Read Aloud, Read Along of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. And if you're following along on the PDF version, which I posted on Google Classroom, we are on page 38, paragraph 3. So just third paragraph down from the top. I'm hoping we're going to finish chapter 1 today, and I think we're finally going to figure out why Bilbo Baggins has so many unexpected guests in his hobbit hole. I'm excited to find out. Now for some music, said Thorin. Bring out the instruments. Keely and Feely rushed for their bags and brought back little fiddles. Dori, Nori, and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bombur produced a drum from the hall. Bifur and Bofur went out too and came back with clarinets that they had left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin said, Excuse me, I left mine on the porch. Just bring mine in with you, said Thorin. And they came back with viols as big as themselves and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else, and was swept away into dark lands under strange moons, far over the water and very far from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened up in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April. And still they played on while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly, first one and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes. And this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without the music. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarves of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells, in places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fells. For ancient king and elvish lord, there many a gleaming golden hoard, they shaped and wrought, and light they caught, to hide in gems on hilts of sword. On silver necklaces they strung the flowering stars, on crowns they hung the dragon fire and twisted wire, they meshed the light of moon and sun. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to claim our long-forgotten gold. Goblets they carved there for themselves, and harps of gold where no man delves. There lay they long, and many a song was sung unheard by men or elves. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, it flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and men looked up with faces pale. Then dragons' ire, more fierce than fire, laid low their towers and houses frail. The mountain smoked beneath the moon. The dwarves, they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their hall to dying fall, beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away ere break of day, to win our harps and gold from him. As they sang, the hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands, and cunning, and by magic moving through him, a fierce and jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something tookish woke up in him, and he wished to go and see the great mountain. and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out of the window. The stars were out in a dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels of the dwarves shining in dark caverns. Suddenly, in the wood, beyond the water, a flame leapt up, probably somebody lighting a wood fire, and he thought of plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill and kindling it all to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was plain Mr. Baggins of Bag End, Underhill again. He got up trembling. He had less than half a mind to fetch the lamp and more than half a mind to pretend to and go and hide beneath the beer barrels in the cellar and not come out again until all the dwarves had gone away. Suddenly he found that the music and the singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him with eyes shining in the dark. "Where are you going?" said Thorin, in a tone that seemed to show that he guessed both halves of the hobbit's mind. "What about a little light?" said Bilbo apologetically. "We like the dark," said all the dwarves. "Dark for dark business. There are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat in the fender, knocking over the poker and shovel with a crash. "Hush," said Gandalf. "Let Thorin speak." And this is how Thorin began. "Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins, we are met together in the house of our friend and fellow conspirator, this most excellent and audacious hobbit. May the hair on his toes never fall out. All praise to his wine and ale." He paused for breath and for a polite remark from the hobbit, but the compliments were quite lost on Bilbo Baggins, who was wagging his mouth in protest at being called audacious, and worst of all, fellow conspirator. The no noise came out, and he was so flummoxed. So Thorin went on. "We are met to discuss our plans, our ways, means, policies, and devices. We shall soon before the break of day start on our long journey, a journey from which some of us, or perhaps all of us, except our friend and counselor, the ingenious wizard Gandalf, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our object is, I take it, well known to all of us. To the estimable Mr. Baggins, and perhaps to one or two of the younger dwarves, I think I should be right in naming Keely and Feely, for instance, the exact situation in the moment may require a brief explanation." This was Thorin's style. He was an important dwarf. If he had been allowed, he probably would have gone on like this until he was out of breath without telling anyone there anything that was not known already. But he was rudely interrupted. Poor Bilbo couldn't bear it any longer. At "may never return," he began to feel a shriek coming up inside, and very soon it burst out like the whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All the dwarves sprang up, knocking over the table. Gandalf struck a blue light on the end of his magic staff, and in its firework glare, the poor little hobbit could be seen kneeling on the hearthrug, shaking like a jelly that was melting. Then he fell flat on the floor and kept on calling out, "Struck by lightning! Struck by lightning!" over and over again until that was all they could get out of him for a long time. So they took him and laid him out of the way on the drawing-room sofa with a drink at his elbow, and then they went back to their dark business. "Excitable little fellow," said Gandalf as they sat down again. "Gets funny queer fits, but he is one of the best, as fierce as a dragon in a pinch." Now, if you had ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you will realize that this was only poetical exaggeration applied to any hobbit, even to old Took's great-grand-uncle Bullroarer, who was so huge for a hobbit that he could actually ride a horse. He charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Graham in the Battle of the Green Fields and knocked their king's Glowfumble's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and then went down a rabbit hole. And in this way, the battle was won and the game of golf was invented. In the meanwhile, however, Bullroarer's gentler descendant was reviving in the drawing room. After a while and a drink, he crept nervously to the door of the parlor. This is when he heard Gloin speaking Or some snort more or less like that. We do you think? It's all very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce, but no one shrieks like that in a moment of excitement, and would be good enough to wake the dragon. But one shriek like that in a moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon and all his relatives and kill the lot of us. I think it sounded more like fright than excitement. In fact, if it had not been for that sign on the door, I should have been sure that we have come to the wrong house. As soon as I clapped my eyes on that little fellow bobbing and puffing on the mat, I had my doubts. He looks more like a grocer than a burglar. Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took side had won. He suddenly felt that he would go without bed and breakfast to be thought fierce. As for a little fellow bobbing on the mat, it almost made him really fierce. Many a time afterwards the Baggins part regretted what he did now, and he said to himself, Bilbo, you were a fool, you walked right in and put your foot in it. Pardon me, he said, if I have overheard words that you were saying. I don't pretend to understand what you're talking about, or your reference to burglars, but I think I am right in believing, and this is what he called being on his dignity, that you think I am no good. I will show you. I have no signs on my door. It was painted a week ago, and I am quite sure that you have come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts, but treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of the east and fight the wild wereworms in the last desert. I had a great-great-granduncle once, Thror Took, and... Yes, but that was a long time ago, said Gloin. I was talking about you. And I assure you that there is a mark on this door, the usual one in the trade, or used to be. It means burglar wants a good job, plenty of excitement and reasonable reward. That's how it's usually read. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar if you like. Some of them do. It's all the same to us. Gandalf told us that there was a man of the sorts in these parts looking for a job at once, and that he had arranged for a meeting here this Wednesday at tea time. Of course there's a mark, said Gandalf. I've put it there myself, for very good reasons. You asked me to find the 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins. Just let anyone say I chose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and have all the bad luck you like, or go back to digging coal. He scowled so angrily at Gloin that the dwarf huddled back in his chair, and when Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask a question, he turned and frowned at him and stuck out his bushy eyebrows, till Bilbo shut his mouth tight with a snap. That's right, said Gandalf. Let's have no more argument. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for all of you. If I say he is a burglar he is, or will be when the time comes. There is a lot more in him than you guess, and a deal more than he has any idea of himself. You may possibly all live to thank me yet. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp, and let's have a little light on this. On the table, in the light of a big lamp with a red shade, he spread a piece of parchment rather like a map. This was made by Thror, your grandfather, Thorn, he said in answer to the dwarves' excited questions. It is a plan of the mountain. I don't see that this will help us much, said Thorin disappointedly after a glance. I remember the mountain well enough, and the lands about it. And I know where Mirkwood is, and the weathered heath, where the great dragons breed. There is a dragon marked in red on the mountain, said Balin, but it will be easy enough to find him without that, if we ever arrive there. There is one point that you haven't noticed, said the wizard, and that is the secret entrance. You see that rune on the west side, and the hand pointing to it from the other runes? That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. Now you can look at the map at the beginning of this book, or you can look at the map that I put on our Google Slides if you want to see Thror's map. It may have been a secret once, said Thorin, but how do we know that it is secret any longer? Old Smaug has lived there long enough to find out anything there is to know about those caves. He may, but he can't have used it for years and years. Why? Because it is too small. 5 feet high the door, and 3 may walk abreast, say the runes, but Smaug could not creep into a hole that size, not even when he was a young dragon. Certainly not after devouring so many of the dwarves and men of Dale. It seems a great big hole to me, squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so that he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and in his hall there hung a large one of the country road with all of his favorite walks marked on it in red ink. How could such a large door be kept secret from everybody outside, apart from the dragon? He asked. He was only a little hobbit, if you will remember. In lots of ways, said Gandalf, but in what way this one has been hidden, we don't know without going to see. From what it says on the map, I should guess that there is a closed door which has been made to look exactly like the side of the mountain. That is the usual dwarves' method. I think that is right, isn't it? Quite right, said Thorin. Also, went on Gandalf, I forgot to mention that with the map went a key, a small and curious key. Here it is, he said, and handed to Thorin a key with a long barrel and intricate wards made of silver. Keep it safe. Indeed I will, said Thorin, and he fastened it upon a fine chain that hung about his neck and under his jacket. Now things begin to look more hopeful. This news alters them much for the better. So far we have had no clear idea what to do. We thought of going east, as quiet and as careful as we could, as far along as the Long Lake. After that the trouble would begin. A long time before that, if I know anything about the roads east, interrupted Gandalf. We might go from there up along the river running, went on Thorin, taking no notice, and so to the ruins of Dale, the old town in the valley there under the shadow of the mountain. But we none of us like the idea of the front gate. The river runs right out of it, through the great cliff at the south of the mountain, and out of it comes the dragon too, far too often unless he's changed his habits. We're going to stop there. I thought we would be able to finish the chapter, but I think we still have a couple more pages to go. So now we know a little bit of what happened to the dwarves' ancestral home. And there is a version of the song that I read. Some musicians have set it to music, and you can find that on our Google Slides if you'd like to listen to what it's supposed to sound like. It's really, really neat. So we know what the problem is now, and it sounds like what we're going to learn in the rest of the chapter is what the dwarves plan to do about the problem. So, if no spoilers, but if you have any ideas about what they might be planning to do, go ahead and add that to the comments on our Google Classroom, and I will have another chapter up tomorrow. Thanks again for joining me for our Read Aloud Read Along, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.